FEMA and to some of the State Farm agents. But with that, I would, and I think this is a non-controversial amendment, and would yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Alabama yields back his time. The gentleman from California.
I move the adoption of the amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. All time has been yielded back. The question is on amendment offered by the gentleman from California. As many as are in favor will signify by saying aye. Those opposed will say no. Opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. And the amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider amendment number 17, printed in House Report 112-138. For what purpose does the gentleman from Iowa rise? For what purpose does the gentleman from Iowa seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 17, printed in House Report number 112-138, offered by Mr. Loebsack of Iowa.
Pursuant to House Resolution 340, the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Loebsack, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Iowa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized for as much time as he may consume.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank Congresswoman Biggert for bringing this bill to the floor. I look forward to supporting this important legislation that will address many of the issues I have been experiencing in my district and ones I know are occurring all across the country. In Iowa, we are all too familiar with the flood insurance program because of the devastating floods of 2008 and again on the Missouri River in western Iowa this summer. We also have many communities throughout the state going through the mapping process. Unfortunately, due to a lack of adequate notification during the process of flood mapping, many homeowners continue to be surprised when they find out that their homes are newly placed in a floodplain and they will be required to purchase flood insurance. My amendment will help ensure communities and property owners that are affected by new maps are made aware of the process taking place from the beginning. Currently, FEMA is only required to publish a notice of new flood elevations in a local newspaper. For one community in my district, this translated literally to a paragraph in the legal notice section. My amendment will require FEMA to notify not only the local paper, but also a local television and radio station, because I think it's time we update this law to be more reflective of all the media our constituents use daily. Ensuring communities have the information needed at the beginning is one step. The next is ensuring that there is appropriate time and ability for communities and property owners to appeal the drafts. Currently, there's a 90-day appeal period for property owners to dispute FEMA's draft maps. Many property owners don't find out this process is taking place until after the map is finalized, meaning the 90-day appeal period has long passed and they no longer have the ability to ensure their houses are not included in the final map in error. My amendment ensures that communities and property owners have an additional 90 days to appeal the draft maps if they weren't aware of the original appeal period and believe there are property owners that haven't been made aware of the appeals process already. I think we can all agree that every property owner who might be affected by flood maps should have an opportunity to fully participate in the established process and that we should strive to have the most accurate maps possible. My amendment will ensure that homeowners have the information they need to make informed decisions and preparations at the beginning of the process and fully participate in the existing appeals process. The more homeowners that are aware of flood maps, the more participation there is in the process, in the program, and the more accurate our maps will be. Greater map accuracy will give us better awareness of the flood risks in our communities and allow homeowners and community leaders alike to take steps to mitigate and prepare for that risk. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment on behalf of property owners in all of our districts, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Iowa reserves his time. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Illinois rise?
Mr. Chairman, I claim time in opposition to the amendment, even though I support the amendment.
Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of this amendment. I think that proper and effective notification by FEMA allows the protection provided by the NFIP to reach out to those who need it. And the amendment also includes provisions designed to benefit communities that believe that they have been incorrectly mapped in the flood program, further enhancing the validity of the maps by providing an appeal for newly mapped areas. And I would support it, and I would reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady reserves her time. The gentleman from Iowa.
Reserve the balance of my time.
Does anybody wish to yield back their time? The gentleman from Iowa wish to yield back his time?
In closing, I would urge my colleagues to support this amendment. Again, I thank Ms. Biggert for support of this amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentlelady from Illinois.
Mr. Speaker, I would recognize the chairman for 2 minutes. 1 minute.
Gentleman from Alabama is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. I'd like to commend Mr. Losack for his amendment. I'd also like to say that because it does require or ask that TV and radio be utilized to get the word out, the next amendment by the lady from Michigan actually would, and I've taken no position on her amendment, but it actually asks that National Flood Insurance not incur advertising expenses. And I think there's some good points to that, some bad points. But as this amendment proves, the local stations themselves and the local media can get these things out. So that might be a point in favor of her first amendment. I'm very opposed to her second amendment. So I don't want the members to confuse support, or at least non-opposition to her First Amendment as support for a second. But I commend the gentleman, and I think it's a good sense amendment, would urge strong support to the Losack amendment.
Reclaiming my time, I would yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Johnson.
Gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, and I thank the distinguished sponsor, and would preface my comments by saying I'm strongly in support of Congresswoman Biggert's superb piece of legislation. However, I rise today in opposition to this amendment offered by Representative Sherman. I'd like to point out first that I fully understand and support the goal of encouraging private sector involvement and exploring ways to diminish unnecessary reliance on government programs. However, I'm not convinced, in fact I'm unconvinced, this amendment gets us any closer to achieving that goal. In fact, this amendment may put Congress in the position of choosing winners and losers in the marketplace, interfering with private contracts, and creating millions of dollars in new federal spending. I'd like to make the following points. Regardless of whether a flood insurance policy is provided through NFIP Direct or WYO, the federal government is responsible for all the losses incurred under the policy. FEMA has informed Congress that private contractors handling NFIP direct policies can manage the recently transferred policies for $50 million less, which is a saving of $250 million over the life of the bill. I don't have to tell any individuals in today's world what that means. Redistribution of these policies destroys, in my judgment, consumer choice and dictates to consumers the company and agent they are required to use for flood insurance while taking property from the agents who produce the business. This redistribution affects flood insurance policyholders and insurance agents in every district in the country. Really, the only thing this amendment does is the forcible transfer of policies from one group to the other with not only no cost savings, with significant cost to the federal government. A lot of questions to answer. I believe the committee and Representative Biggert took the right approach in requesting a study before acting on the issue. Unfortunately, today we seem to be acting contrary-wise before we have these answers. And with all due respect, again, to the sponsor of the amendment, and certainly in concert with the sponsor of the bill, I urge a no vote on this amendment. And thank you for your time.
Gentlelady from Illinois.
I yield the balance of my time to the gentleman from Alabama.
Thank you. I think the gentleman from Illinois was arguing on the last amendment, not this amendment. So if the members will take everything he said, transfer it to the amendment before, it would be appropriate, but I disagree with his argument. But so with that, I yield back the balance of our time.
Gentlelady from Illinois, yield back her time.
I yield back the balance of my time.
All time has expired on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Iowa. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Iowa. As many as are in favor will signify by saying aye. Those opposed will say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider amendment number 19, printed in House Report 112-138. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 19, printed in House Report number 112-138, offered by Mr. Westmoreland of Georgia.
Pursuant to House Resolution 340, the gentleman from Georgia and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank Chairwoman Biggert for her hard work on this bill, and the ranking member, Mr. Gutierrez, and the gentlelady from California, who is very overseer of this program. This amendment is a forward-thinking amendment to put the flood insurance program on sound footing. Consider this amendment the National Flood Insurance Emergency Fund. Currently, premiums come in, payments go out, but nothing is reserved for the events that no one can predict. Claims are paid with existing premiums, and everyone crosses their fingers that nothing really bad happens. If incoming premiums are not enough, then the National Flood Insurance Program has no other option than to ask for a bailout. In fact, the NFIP program has carried debt in 18 of the past 30 years. Most interesting of all is that not all of these years saw catastrophic flooding. FEMA just didn't do a good job managing premiums and claims. It's clear that in good years and in bad, the flood insurance program does not have a good grasp on how much they will pay out in claims. However, when catastrophic flood does happen, NFIP program is even less prepared for the claims. 2005 was one of those years that nobody could predict. Hurricanes Katrina, Rita, and Wilma together caused $17 billion in losses for the National Flood Insurance Program. 6 years later, including principal and interest, the NFIP debt is now $18 billion. Every year it seems like flooding impacts a wide swath of the United States, and 2011 has been no different. No one can predict the weather. What NFIP needs is the ability to save up to help smooth out those unpredictable years. If the program could stash money away in good times, it would have money to pay for the years when the estimates were incorrect. My amendment does just that. It establishes a reserve fund in the NFIP program. This is just common sense. So much so, NFIP is one of the few federal funds that does not have a reserve fund. FHA has a 2% reserve requirement. The FDIC Deposit Insurance Fund is required to have a 1.35% reserve ratio. Now I want to take a moment to address some of the possible concerns with the amendment. First, this amendment does not expand the NFIP to other catastrophic events like earthquakes or tornadoes. This fund and the bill remain specific to flooding. Second, the administrator gets funds from the existing premiums. The administrator and the amendment are bound to adhere to the parameters established in the underlying bill on premiums, raises, and annual increases. Third, this amendment does not take away from debt repayment. Any premium collected would be spent to cover losses because the program is running of the deficit. This takes precedent. At some point in the future, the program might be able to collect enough to cover all costs and to set aside a reserve. But given the magnitude of the current debt, this is not likely to occur in the short term. Finally, this amendment does not stand in the way of reinsurance opportunities for the flood program. I support reinsurance for the flood program and firmly believe that both reinsurance and a reserve fund can coexist. In fact, many private insurers reserve for losses and purchase reinsurance. Private insurers will use reserve funds as a deductible for reinsurance coverage. However, I fundamentally believe that as long as taxpayers are involved at the ultimate backstop, this program needs a reserve. It is not responsible to tell taxpayers no more bailouts, but offer no solution to the ongoing bailout of NFIP. If there is no reserve fund, there will be more bailouts. It is just a matter of when. So adopting this amendment would address a fundamental deficiency in the program that is right for bailouts. I urge adoption of the amendment, and with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Georgia reserves his time. For what purpose does the gentlelady from California rise?
To claim time in opposition.
The gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I oppose the gentleman's amendment. Mr. Chairman, in drafting this bill, the chairwoman and I sought to strike the right balance between protecting homeowners and strengthening the flood insurance program. I believe that the bill before us today does just that. Unfortunately, I do not believe that the gentleman's amendment strikes the same balance. Specifically, by creating a reserve fund, the gentleman's amendment would allow the NFIP to increase insurance premiums on homeowners. So regardless of their flood risk, homeowners will have to pay more in order to fund a reserve fund that will never have enough money to pay out claims for catastrophic events. This isn't fair to our taxpayers, Mr. Chairman, and in fact would stall the already slow recovery of the housing market. I understand the problem that the gentleman is attempting to solve. We all know that the flood insurance program is over $17 billion in debt due to claims resulting from Hurricane Katrina. However, I think we have to be clear that Hurricane Katrina was a catastrophic, once-in-a-lifetime event. Prior to Katrina, the flood insurance program operated completely in the black. In addition, I believe that the bill contains many provisions that would allow the flood insurance program to reform its premium structure so that it can collect the premiums it needs to pay out claims. For example, the bill ends subsidies for 350,000 pre-firm properties, including second homes, commercial properties, homes with new owners, homes substantially damaged or improved, and homes with repetitive claims. By making these properties pay actuarial rates that reflect their full risk, the bill would make these properties pay their fair share, thereby increasing the amount of funding to the flood insurance fund. Mr. Chairman, while I believe that the gentleman's amendment is very well intended, I believe that it is unnecessary given the strong reforms in this bill and the potential problems it may cause for homeowners, particularly those being phased into actuarial rates. For these reasons, Mr. Chairman, I must oppose the amendment, and I would urge a no vote. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yield back or reserve her time? Does the gentlelady yield back?
Yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back her time. The gentleman from Georgia.
Mr. Chairman, I respect the lady's opinion, and I know that she is very familiar with this program, but I don't think a reserve fund would cost anybody any additional money. It does not go up on premiums. The premium amount stays the same. This is a rainy day fund, excuse the pun, a fund that would be there. It would not even be started until this current $18 billion in debt is paid off. But we're fooling ourselves if we think that we can predict the weather, if we think we know when Katrina or Rita or Wilma is going to come. This fund would only be established after the debt is repaid. And so it's a very common sense measure to have this reserve fund, as many other government agencies do. And with that, I would ask for a yes vote, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Time of the gentleman has expired. All time has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Georgia. As many as are in favor will signify by saying aye. Those opposed say no. Opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Mr. Chair, I call for a recorded vote.
A recorded vote is requested pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18. Further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Georgia will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 20, printed in House Report 112-138. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Michigan rise?
Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment made in order under the rule.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 20, printed in House Report number 112-138, offered by Mrs. Miller of Michigan.
Pursuant to House Resolution 340, the gentlelady from Michigan, Ms. Miller, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Michigan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And today I'm offering an amendment that would end TV and radio ads that I believe to be a total waste of taxpayers' dollars. Over the past 2 years, FEMA has actually spent over $500,000 on the production of what they call home personified flood insurance commercials. These commercials sort of depict actors with roofs hovering over their heads talking about the need to obtain flood insurance and the fact that 1 in 4 homes are in a high-risk flood zone, and they pitch to contact FEMA for a free brochure about the program. These commercials between April of 2010 and April of 2011 cost over $7 million in airtime to broadcast all across the 50 states, and they're slated to be aired for an additional year at least. $7 million spent on promoting the National Flood Insurance Program, which is a federally mandated flood program, which has been mentioned all throughout the day here, is already almost $18 billion in debt. I would say, why not spend that $7 million to pay back the American taxpayers, or better yet, to begin paying off the program's $18 billion in debt. Mr. Chairman, last year in the election in the fall, the American people sent a very clear message to Washington, and I don't think the message to Congress here was urging us to spend millions of dollars of taxpayers' money on TV commercials, asking them to put money into a failing, bloated, and completely unnecessary government program. No, they were demanding that we get a grip on government spending, on out-of-control government spending. And they were asking us to end programs where the government is trying to fill a role best done by the private sector. Shortly, Mr. Chairman, all of us in this House, in the Congress, in both chambers, are going to be asked to raise our national debt limit because we have not been able to get our fiscal house in order. And this week, here we are being asked to renew a federal program that is over $17 billion in debt currently, all of which falls on the backs of the American taxpayers. And we need to raise the debt ceiling of the flood insurance program as well to almost $25 billion. Who cares, I guess? It's just taxpayers' money. If we want to stop adding to our national debt, we should not continue the federal flood insurance program, and I'm going to be offering an amendment to that in a moment, nor should we continue to spend millions each year on TV commercials for a program that constituents in many, many states, most of the states across the nation, are wondering about at a minimum, and many of them are outraged. I certainly hear from my constituents back in Michigan who are looking for some relief. These hard-pressed taxpayers from my state are asking for less spending, for less government, for lower taxes, and less government intrusion into their lives. They're certainly not asking us for wasteful government programs to be shoved down their throats on television with television ads. My amendment today, Mr. Chairman, to end unnecessary spending on TV commercials for the National Flood Insurance Program will be a down payment on the relief that we owe to the American taxpayers who are concerned about these commercials that seem to be on repeat all across the airwaves in all of the states across our nation. Mr. Chairman, I would ask that my colleagues support this amendment today and vote in favor of saving money, taxpayers' money, for the American taxpayers. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady from Michigan reserves her time. What purpose does the gentlelady from California rise?
To claim the time in opposition.
The gentlelady from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I oppose the gentlewoman's amendment. The gentlewoman's amendment would prohibit FEMA from spending any funds on television or radio commercials to promote the purchase of flood insurance. Floods are the most common and natural disaster in the United States. Unfortunately, even areas that aren't in floodplains experience floods sometimes. When that happens, the federal government provides aid to those homeowners and communities, and it is the taxpayer who pays for that aid. Under the federal flood insurance program, insurance premiums pay for the cost of flood damage. Therefore, if homeowners outside floodplains buy flood insurance, taxpayers won't be on the hook if their properties flood. However, in order to have these homeowners buy flood insurance, they have to learn about the program and its benefits to them. This is where radio and television advertising are helpful. Essential, that is. The ads reach a wide audience and present clear facts about the availability and affordability of flood insurance. To take away FEMA's ability to let the people know what's available to them would actually place the millions of Americans who choose and are not required to purchase flood insurance at risk. Given these times of record deficits, this is simply irresponsible. That is why I urge a no vote on this amendment. Mr. Chairman, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady reserves her time. The gentlelady from Michigan.
Mr. Chairman, I would simply observe that for the most part, the reason that folks, property owners, get national flood insurance is because the federal government holds a gun to their heads and says that you cannot get a federally backed mortgage unless you buy federal national flood insurance through the National Flood Insurance Program. And so I don't think we have to spend millions and millions of dollars to convince them to do something that, in my mind, I question whether it's even constitutional that we are forcing people to do this kind of a thing. But I certainly don't think we need to spend millions of dollars to notify them on something that we are mandating for them. And certainly if you live in a flood-prone area, you probably know it. And I just don't think, with everything going on in the nation, I just can't believe we're wasting money like this. And I would certainly urge my constituents to support this amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back her time. The gentlelady from California.
Mr. Chairman, as I mentioned earlier, when the gentlelady offered her views during the general discussion, she certainly does not join with her colleagues who have joined with us in a bipartisan way to produce a bill that is in the best interest of all of the citizens of this country. As a matter of fact, I have referred to her views on this issue as rather radical. I think that for us to have an insurance program that allows participation by the average citizen so that they can be in a position to make themselves whole after a disaster, to basically repair their homes, to replace their furnishing, to have a way of continuing a decent quality of life is not too much to ask of your government. And so I would oppose this amendment and consider this amendment also just as radical. To say that you have a program but you can't tell anybody about it simply does not make good sense. I would reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlelady from Michigan has yielded back her time. Anybody else?
I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back her time. The question then is on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Michigan. As many as are in favor will signify by saying aye. Those opposed will say no. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The gentlelady.
I would ask for a recorded vote.
Recorded vote is requested pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18. Further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Michigan will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 23, printed in House Report 112-138. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk made in order under the rule.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
23, printed in House Report Number 112-138, offered by Mr. Scott of Virginia.
Pursuant to House Resolution 340, the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Scott, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Virginia.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I offer this amendment. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized for as much time as he may consume.
Mr. Chairman, I offer this amendment today to propose what I believe would be a proactive solution for homeowners when they face unforeseen disasters. My amendment would just simply ask the GAO to report to Congress the means and effects of facilitating a market for all peril insurance policies. This amendment comes directly from an issue faced by many of my constituents and nearly 4,000 households around the country, problems associated with the unforeseen disaster caused by toxic Chinese drywall. Over the last 5 years, nearly 4,000 homes in over 40 states have been discovered to contain toxic Chinese drywall. This drywall has been tested by the Consumer Product Safety Commission and found to be responsible for hazardous chemicals oozing into homes. Americans living in these homes have experienced everything from cold and flu-like symptoms to migraine headaches, chronic nosebleeds, gastrointestinal problems, and other debilitating symptoms. Homeowners with homes tainted with toxic drywall have had the expectation that the costs associated with remediating their homes would be covered by their homeowners insurance policy, but virtually all of their policies exclude from coverage many of the different classes of damages. These, in the case of Chinese drywall, a standard homeowners policy does not cover, quote, losses to property resulting from faulty zoning, bad repair or workmanship, faulty construction material, or defective maintenance. And so these families are stuck with paying their mortgages and have homes that are essentially uninhabitable. This problem is not limited to just Chinese drywall. In the aftermath of hurricanes, many homeowners discover that they are not covered for water damage and frequently have to argue whether or not their home was destroyed by water or by wind. Sinkholes, which are normally associated with areas with histories of mining or seismic activity, are springing up outside of these typical areas, and homeowners are learning the hard way that they are not covered by damages caused by them. I believe that homeowners need all-peril insurance, insurance that covers homeowners from catastrophic losses regardless of cause, provided, of course, that the homeowners did not cause the loss themselves. All-peril plans would be supplemental insurance policies that would cover losses resulting from any of the causes currently excluded from the standard homeowners policy. And these policies could be limited to catastrophic losses and provide for substantial deductibles and possibly only cover losses that render property uninhabitable. With that in mind, Mr. Chairman, my amendment would direct the GAO to fully study the implications of an all-perils policy. Why can't a policy be bought now? Is there no interest in it? Could the federal government successfully market the plans with the private sector? I feel answers to these questions are needed, but what we do know is that when circumstances beyond a homeowner's control make a home uninhabitable, the last thing they want to do is look through a policy and find that their completely destroyed home isn't protected by the insurance policy that they bought. It's for this reason that I offer the amendment, Mr. Chairman, for a GAO study and ask that the amendment be adopted, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Virginia reserves his time. For what purposes does the gentlelady from Illinois rise?
Mr. Chairman, I claim time in opposition.
The gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment, which would direct GAO to conduct a study on all-peril insurance policies for residential property, to me really expands beyond the scope of this bill. Fundamental reform of the National Flood Insurance Program should be the priority of this Congress, including the removal of subsidies over time to improve the long-term solvency of the program. In contrast, the Scott Amendment would dramatically increase the scope at a time when government insurance programs such as NFIP are essentially insolvent and remain grossly underfunded. If the gentleman would like to have an all-peril study, it's something that he has an option to write a letter to the GAO and request such a study, and that will be done. But to tie it into the flood insurance makes it seem like we're going to expand the flood insurance when we're really trying to decrease the expansion and really to bring in the private sector to do this. So I really think that this is way beyond what we should be doing. And it would really, his amendment would pave the way to expand the federal government's role in the private insurance market by creating a massive new program to offer government-provided coverage backed by taxpayer dollars against property losses. And I think, you know, that if he's really interested in the drywall particularly, that this is something that he can ask for a study in that, and it really should not be within the scope of this bill. And I would urge opposition to this amendment and reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlelady reserves her time. The gentleman from Virginia.
Mr. Chairman, how much time do I have remaining?
The gentleman has 1 1/2 minute remaining.
Mr. Chairman, this study would not affect the underlying provisions of the bill. The priorities of the bill remain the priorities of the bill. This would just affect the situation where people find their homes uninhabitable and are looking for help. This does not have to be a government program. The GAO could recommend that it could be a private program and possibly get out of the flood insurance business altogether if it covers all perils. I would hope that we would at least study the issue to see if it is feasible. So anybody who's talked to people with Chinese drywall and find that their house is uninhabitable, they're paying their mortgage, they don't have anywhere to go, they can't afford another mortgage, and their insurance policies they paid premiums for every month, month after month after month, doesn't cover anything. I think if you're buying insurance, it ought to insure you for unforeseen circumstances, and that's what this study would provide. I hope you'd adopt the amendment, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Virginia yields back his time. The gentlelady from Illinois.
I would yield back the balance of my time and request a no vote.
The all time has been yielded back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Virginia. As many as are in favor will signify by saying aye. Those opposed will say no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I would ask for the yeas and nays.
The gentlelady asked for a recorded vote.
I ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Virginia will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment 25, printed in House Report 112-138. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Michigan rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk made in order under the rule.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 25, printed in House Report number 112-138, offered by Mrs. Miller of Michigan.
Pursuant to House Resolution 340, the gentlelady from Michigan, Ms. Miller, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Michigan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I would yield myself as much time as I would consume. And I would begin, I guess, by asking a very fundamental question. Why in the world is the federal government in the flood insurance business? Really, I do not understand it. I don't think anyone should be surprised to learn that the federal government is not a very good insurance agent, that they run a terrible insurance program, as evidenced by the $18 billion in debt that the NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program, has racked up over the years and will probably never repay. I don't think they'll ever repay it. And if you don't believe me, you can consider the testimony that the administrator of FEMA made before the Financial Services Committee in congressional testimony. He said the program will likely always be in debt, massive debt. Congress set up the NFIP to ostensibly be an insurance company, but it is not held to the same standards as a private insurance company. Instead of holding cash reserves, the NFIP has a bottomless pit of money that it shamelessly taps into. That money pit is also known as the U.S. Treasury, or the American taxpayers. If the NFIP were a private insurance company, it would have gone bankrupt years ago, or it would have been in need of a federal bailout. In other words, when this government-authorized Ponzi scheme runs out of money, it simply gets more by dipping into the pockets of taxpayers. And, Mr. Chairman, I would say that this is a program that would make Bernie Madoff blush. The American people are fed up with bailouts, and this bill is just that, another bailout for another broken program. And if we want to stop adding to our national debt, we should not continue the federal flood insurance program. My home state of Michigan is just one of a majority of states that is actually disadvantaged by this Ponzi scheme. The State House of Representatives has recently passed a resolution condemning the NFIP as fundamentally flawed and unfair, and I would ask unanimous consent to enter that into the record.
It has to be made in the full House.
And I would, Mr. Chairman, and I would expect that the State Senate to follow suit shortly. So there's an entire state. I don't think that's radical. My amendment would actually end the program at the end of this year and allow states to work together to form a regional coalition to shape insurance policies that meets the needs of their particular states. There is no way that a one-size-fits-all insurance program that dramatically subsidizes rates in some of the most flood-prone areas of our nation while at the same time forcing those in less flood-prone areas to pay much higher rates can be sustained. States like mine will simply become fed up and opt out, which is what's going to happen so that they can protect their citizens. And then, of course, it would force this program even deeper into debt. It is time to end this program now. And my amendment would also, and perhaps more importantly, allow the private market to get into the flood insurance business without the federal government's unfair competition of politically based premiums, which would allow premiums to be set based on actual risk. And if you want to get a handle on out-of-control federal spending, start eliminating government programs that do nothing except enforce bad policy and recklessly spend the taxpayers' money. I would ask my colleagues to support my amendment. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlelady reserves her time. For what purpose does the gentlelady from California rise?
To claim time in opposition.
Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I strongly oppose this amendment. The gentlewoman's amendment would terminate entirely the flood insurance program, which provides much-needed insurance for 5.5 million homeowners. The flood insurance program was created in 1968 after record flooding led the private insurance industry to stop writing flood policies. The private sector didn't want to write these policies because floods are very common and very expensive. However, the federal government didn't want to simply write a blank check for homeowners every time it flooded. This is why the flood insurance program was created. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to yield the balance of my time to Chairwoman Biggert, who's worked so hard on this
Gentlelady from Illinois is recognized then for a balance of 4 minutes.
I thank the gentlewoman for yielding, and I know we've had quite a bit of discussion about this already, but I guess maybe we will bring this to a close with this amendment for a while anyway. Let me just say that the underlying bill really doesn't ask for additional borrowing authority. In fact, the reforms in the underlying bill will accelerate the ability of NFIB to pay down its debt. This bill is a revenue raiser and will bring in $4.2 billion to the program, according to the Office of Budget Reform of Congressional Budget Authority. And I think that this means that we've addressed the fact that there has been some problems with NFIB. I think that there was some mismanagement and there was a need for reform. That's why we have spent so much time on this bill to talk to all the different groups, to talk to all the members who've had concerns. And I've got here a list. There's, according to a broad coalition of industry experts and trade associations who all support this, more than 5.6 million policyholders depend on the FIB as their only source of protection against economic devastation from a flood. And in fact, I could read all of these, those that ask for a no vote on this amendment. We've got the American Insurance Association, American Land Title, Building Owners and Management Association, CCIM Institute, Chamber SWL, Council of Insurance Agents and Brokers, the Financial Services Roundtable, Independent Insurance Agents and Brokers of America, Institute of Real Estate Management, International Council of Shopping Centers, Manufactured Home Housing Institution, Mortgage Bankers Association, National Association of Home Builders, National Association of Mutual Insurance Companies, National Association of Realtors, National Ready-Mix Concrete Association, Society of Industrial and Office Realtors, Property and Casualty Insurance Association of America, the Risk and Management Management Society, and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. If you know 5.6 million property owners can't rely on this, what's going to happen? So what's going to happen is we wouldn't have the flood insurance. And on May 13th, the Financial Services Committee favorably reported the Flood Insurance Reform Act by a unanimous vote of 54-0. And anybody that doesn't think that that is, is something that how much time we put into this and how much people cared about it. 54-0 in this Congress, I don't think that that's happened for a bill that is this important in a long, long time. So it really reflects the hard work and bipartisan support of the Financial Services Committee. And again, it has a series of reforms that are going to make this a much better program. It improves the financial stability of the NFIP. It reduces the burden on taxpayer. It restores integrity to the FEMA mapping system and explores ways to increase private market participation. And it helps to bring certainty to the housing market. I would oppose this amendment strongly, and I would reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlelady reserves her time. Gentlelady from Michigan.
Mr. Chairman, at this time I would like to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Higgins.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank my friend and colleague from
from Michigan for yielding. Mr. Chairman, I rise in strong support of this amendment to terminate the National Flood Insurance Program. The flood insurance program is both in its design and execution the worst federal program I have encountered in my time in Congress. This program levies a mandatory flood tax on homeowners who are at virtually no risk of flooding and see absolutely no benefit from the program. In Western New York, the requirement to purchase flood insurance has increased mortgage costs and created economic dead zones in once vibrant neighborhoods. This amendment will finally end this unfair burden on homeowners in communities like Buffalo and Lackawanna, New York, who neither want nor need to purchase flood insurance. I urge my colleagues to support it as well. I thank the gentlelady from Michigan. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. The gentlelady from Michigan.
Mr. Chairman, I would simply reiterate that I don't think this is something that the federal government should be involved in. If you are truly a friend of the taxpayers, and believe me, I appreciate the bipartisanship that happened and the hard work about reforming this program. I understand the need to reform programs, but I also understand the need to get a handle on the federal debt and deficit, and one way to do that is to eliminate unnecessary programs, not just nibble around the edges, which I think is what we are doing here today. So I would certainly urge my colleagues to support this amendment. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back her time. The gentlelady from Illinois has 30 seconds remaining.
Thank you. If this bill were not to pass, and if this amendment were to be agreed to, it would be devastating to at least 20,000 communities if there was no flood insurance. Congress would inevitably have to bail out flood disaster victims, as it did prior to 1968, and that would cost so much more money. And the President would have to sign on to any devastation that might be made, as what happened in Louisiana and after Katrina. I oppose this amendment and support the underlying bill and yield back.
Time of the gentlelady has expired. All time has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Michigan. As many as are in favor will signify by saying aye. Those opposed will say no. In opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask for a recorded vote.
Recorded vote is requested. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Michigan will be postponed. So we're voting, huh? Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, proceedings will now resume on those amendments printed in House Report 112-138, under which further proceedings were postponed in the following order. Amendment number 3 by Ms. Spire of California. Amendment number 4 by Mr. Flake of Arizona. Amendment number 11 by Mr. Cardozo of California. Amendment number 19 by Mr. Westmoreland of Georgia. Amendment number 20 by Mrs. Miller of Michigan. Amendment number 23 by Mr. Scott of Virginia. And amendment number 25 by Mrs. Miller of Michigan. The chair will reduce to 2 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote after the first series of votes. The unfinished business, the request for a recorded vote on amendment number 3, printed in House Report 112-138 by the gentlelady from California, Mrs. Spear, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the ayes prevail by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 3, printed in House Report number 112-138, offered by Ms. Spear of California.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of requests for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This is a 15-minute vote.
A second round of recorded votes on the House floor. They're going to vote here on a number of amendments to the reauthorization of the flood insurance programs bill through 2016. This first amendment vote, an amendment posed by Jackie Spear of California. It's a 15-minute vote, and the following votes will be 2-minute votes. Also underway this afternoon at the White House, discussions over the debt and deficit as the meetings continue ahead of the August 2nd deadline of raising the debt ceiling. Jonathan Nicholson is a reporter with BNA News who joins us on the phone. Earlier today, Mitch McConnell put forth a contingency plan to keep the government afloat if the debt ceiling negotiations, the discussions can't reach an agreement. What is Leader McConnell proposing?
It's kind of the newest wrinkle so far in some of the things that have been tossed around, because there's been talk of a $4 trillion plan and $2 trillion plan, but given how slow progress seems to be being made in the talks, McConnell's put forward what he calls a contingency plan to ensure that there is no possibility of default. And it's interesting because it basically would sort of try and tie President Obama sending up spending cuts in return for successive rounds of debt ceiling increases totaling around 2.4 trillion. However, it's expected to get a cold shoulder at the White House, given that just the other day President Obama said that he didn't want to deal with any short-term 30, 60, 90-day kinds of things. And that was something that was also emphasized this morning by Democratic Whip Steny Hoyer, who says that short-term measures will just simply roil the markets.
Well, what are Senate Republicans, Senator McConnell, by offering this plan at this stage in the negotiations?
I think one of the things they're trying to do is to make sure that they're not seen as liable or potentially at blame should there be some sort of financial market fallout from this. They're trying to come across as reasonable. They're trying to counter the White House narrative that the Republicans are intransigent and don't want to make any compromises of their own.
Meanwhile, earlier today on the House side, leaders came out of the caucus and put a lot of the responsibility back onto the president. Actually, Speaker Boehner saying something to the effect it's his problem. What was their message in saying that?
They still want the president to come out with a detailed plan, and they basically are still saying that he should not, in their eyes, hold hostage spending cuts that they say could be easily achieved and an agreement reached upon to tax increases. It also depends upon what you think a fair concession is in bargaining. For the Democrats, one of their things has been that raising the debt ceiling, it has to be done no matter whose budget, whether it's the Ryan budget or anyone else's budget, was to be put in place. So therefore, Republicans saying that they're making a concession by agreeing to eventually increase the debt ceiling is not really a concession at all. Hoyer earlier today called that kind of thinking from House Majority Leader Cantor yesterday, quote, an extraordinary comment to be made in a democracy. So they're still pretty well at loggerheads on the rhetoric.
What about Senator Reid? Has he reacted to Senator McConnell's plan?
I actually am not aware of any official reaction at this point, but it seems like a very what's the word? It seems like it could be a complicated sort of multi-step process versus just simply some sort of, what everyone's been talking about for the last few weeks, some sort of deficit reduction deal of some size versus debts to be linked to a debt ceiling increase.
Well, is it safe to say at this point that any sort of tax increase or revenue raiser, as been called, is off the table in these discussions?
According to Republicans, it is. Democrats still say that they want some sort of, quote, balanced package, unquote, which would include new revenues. It's still unclear as to whether that can be achieved in a way that can satisfy House Republican conservatives who have defined tax increases as revenue increases mainly, and yet still thread the eye of the needle to get through the Democratic-held Senate. So it's still, there's not a whole bunch in terms of progress that seems apparent, at least to me today.
Well, keeping track of that progress, what little there may be. Jonathan Nicholson of BNA News, thank you for that update.
Thank you.
And on the House floor, the first of 9 or 10 amendment votes to the flood insurance bill, this one by Jackie Spear of California. It's a 15-minute vote, and all of the other votes that follow will be all of the other amendment votes that follow will be 2-minute votes, and more work ahead on the flood insurance bill. Still more work ahead, too, on the energy and water bill, although they did dispose with a number of amendments and a series of votes earlier today. Well, you heard Jonathan Nicholson explaining a bit about Senator McConnell's comments and his proposal on his contingency plan in case an agreement isn't reached with the White House and congressional Democrats. We're going to give you a chance to see that in just a moment. But first, we want to take you to the comments of Senator Harry Reid earlier today before the Senate came back in session this afternoon.
I was stunned to hear the Speaker today say the debt ceiling is President Obama's problem. This is a reversal from just a few months ago when the Speaker said we have to deal with the debt ceiling, quote, as adults. He also said another quote, whether we like it or not, the federal government has obligations and we have obligations on our part, end of quote. Speaker Boehner was right then, he's wrong now. The deficit is not just one party's problem. Speaker Boehner seems to have forgotten about the 8 years when Republicans turned a surplus into huge deficits with unpaid for taxes for millionaires, unpaid wars, unpaid for drug benefits. Raising the debt ceiling was not just Ronald Reagan's problem when he raised it 18 times. Ronald Reagan raised the debt ceiling 18 times. That's why the Speaker, John Boehner, has voted for increasing the debt ceiling on many occasions. But most importantly, failing to raise the debt ceiling will be a major problem for the millions of Americans who would not receive Social Security checks and for our troops who wouldn't get paid. It would cause the stock market to crash, draining American savings and retirement funds. I've watched Secretary Geithner during the course of these discussions become more concerned, more solemn each time we meet. He understands more than anyone else the issues facing our country. But I do agree with Speaker Boehner, what he said before. Whether we like it or not, this is everyone's problem, not just a problem that a few deal with. It's a problem we have to deal with it like adults. Acting like adults does not mean walking out of the room every time talks get serious. Republicans have done it time and time again the last few years. The first time was the Conrad Gregg legislation, where 7 Republican senators who sponsored the legislation walked away from it. That's number one. Number two, the Gang of Six, which met in every hallway and room in the whole Capitol complex over months. They walked out of that. The Biden talks, most of them took place over in S-219. Cantor and Kyle walked out on those. We then had the Obama-Boehner talks. Remember, those are the ones where the Speaker said, I wasn't elected to do small things, I was elected to do big things. Excuse me. And I guess he changed overnight. He said he didn't want any part of that. Those talks are struggling along. But in effect, Boehner walked out on those talks also. The reality that we have to face is that we have to have shared sacrifices in whatever we do, whatever arrangement we make to raise the debt ceiling. Walking away from reality is a weakness we cannot afford. It's a weakness that our economy and our middle class cannot afford. So I hope Republicans will wake up to that reality and start leading instead of just walking away. I received a call from my counterpart, Senator McConnell, at 12:30 today. He has a proposal that some of you, I think, have already looked over. Is that right, if some of you have seen his proposal? Well, it's out anyway. And he'll explain that to you. He'll be out here shortly. I'm not about to trash his proposal. It's something that I will look at. I will look at it intently, and I think any new ideas I'm willing to look at. So I'm not here to trash Senator McConnell's new proposal. I'll be happy to take a look at it. I look forward to our meeting that convenes at 3:45 today, and I will do my utmost to take that into consideration.
Senator, should the President consider invoking the 14th Amendment?
No. Here's what's happened. This is a question that I think we should get to. Whether the President should invoke the 14th Amendment. The answer, in my opinion, is no. Until 1939, in this country, we never had a debt ceiling. It started in 1939. We've raised it, I think, 84 times since 1939. 55 times has been with Republican presidents, 34 times with Democratic presidents. So whatever that math is, that's how many times we've raised it. So most of the debt ceilings have been increased with Republicans, and I think we should, now we have a Democratic president, I think we should play by the rules that we've established since 1939 and raise the debt ceiling.
Senator, can you expand on your views about Senator McConnell's proposal?
Well, Paul, I really can't expand on him too much because I don't know much about him. He talked to me for just a few minutes. As some of you know, I'm not long on the telephone, and either is he, so it didn't take very long. But he gave me the outline of that, and I'm happy to take a look at it. His chief of staff has briefed my chief of staff. I haven't had a time to talk to David Crone at all, but I'm willing to look at this, and I don't in any way disparage what Senator McConnell has come up with. He and I have had a number of meetings over the last few weeks talking about the concern we both have, and I will be happy to give his consideration, his suggestion every consideration.
The President has said that he wants to have the debt deal address entitlement programs, but you've made a very strong stand against Medicare and especially Social Security. Are you ready to support a deal that changes those programs? I'm
only willing to take a look at Medicare and Medicaid if there is a grand bargain of more than $4 trillion that has significant revenue raisers. I will not touch Medicare and Medicaid for some simple little deal that we get nothing that's beneficial to the country. Medicare and Medicaid should not be tampered with unless there's a grand bargain. Pardon me?
Social Security?
Social Security is same as Medicare and Medicaid.
Does that include beneficiary cuts as part of the grand bargain with beneficiary cuts?
Well, the grand bargain, obviously, there's no need to start talking about the grand bargain because that's been trashed by Cantor and Kyle, and I haven't heard any wild applause from anyone else, the Republicans. Boehner walked out on it, said he couldn't do it, so let's not spend a lot of our time on the grand bargain. Well, my caucus is anxious to find out where we are. And finding out where we are is extremely difficult. It changes from day to day. I'm going back, as I indicated, at 3:45. My caucus has always been reasonable. We're team players, and we'll continue being that way. But until we have something to team up with, there's nothing to even hold a huddle on. You know, my only concern is why am I taking so many questions? Okay, well, go ahead.
Would you anticipate, in addition to a proposal from Senator McConnell, that the House Republicans, be it Leader Cantor or the Speaker, would bring their own proposal to the White House today or in the days to come?
I had no conversation with Senator McConnell about that.
Has there been any talk including unemployment benefits in the deal?
On the grand bargain, of course. Okay, everybody, thanks.
Senator Reid from earlier today, and presumably at this hour, he is at the White House with other congressional leaders for those debt and deficit talks. Earlier today as well, though, and Senator Reid was asked about this, the Republican leader, Senator McConnell, Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, offered a contingency plan to allow the president to request increases of up to $2.4 trillion in the government's borrowing authority over 3 separate installments over the next year. He made the announcement of that plan this afternoon at a news conference, and we'll show that to you during the remainder of this First Amendment vote.
Well, hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Senator Kyle and I will be going down to the White House shortly for our daily meeting to discuss whether or not we're going to be able to come together and take advantage of the opportunity presented to us by the President's request to raise the debt ceiling. One thing that I just had an opportunity to brief my members on is a sort of last choice option. If we're unable to come together, we think it's extremely important that the country reassure the markets that default is not an option, and reassure Social Security recipients and families of military veterans that default is not an option. Senate Republicans will be on the floor next week advocating a balanced budget amendment to require us to live within our means. All 47 Republicans are behind that proposal, and we hope to attract enough Democrats to pass it. If the White House talks lead not to a conclusion that we can go forward together to reduce spending, which is our single biggest problem, then what is the alternative? And so what I've told my members is that we will have available a sort of backup plan that would operate as follows. I would advocate that we pass legislation giving the President the authority to request of us an increase in the debt ceiling that would take us past the end of his term. That is what he has said. He said he will not sign a debt ceiling that does not take us past the end of his term. In this legislation, if it were to pass, he would make 3 separate requests of it. The first request would be initiated by passing the legislation in the next few weeks. He would send up a request of us to raise the debt ceiling, probably by $700 billion. That would be subject to a resolution of disapproval. If you're thinking of an analogy, think of the Congressional Review Act. That resolution of disapproval, if passed, would then go to the President. He could sign it, or he could veto it. Presumably, he would veto it. If that were the case, that veto would be sustained by 1/3 plus 1 in either the House or the Senate. The legislation also would require him to list, would not implement these cuts unilaterally, but would require him to list spending cuts he would make in the same amount as the debt ceiling request he's making of us. Then there would be a second request based upon his desire to have enough debt ceiling to get him through the end of his term. There'd be a second request in all likelihood in the fall. It would follow the same procedure. He would ask us to raise the debt ceiling. I think it's highly likely that both houses would consider and probably pass resolutions of disapproval, which, if they passed, he would veto, and those resolutions would be sustained. His veto would be sustained by 1/3 plus 1. That would happen one more time in June. So this is, again, not my first choice. You know, I had hoped all year long that the opportunity presented by his request of us to raise the debt ceiling would generate a bipartisan agreement that would begin to get our house in order by reducing spending. That may still happen. I still hope it will. But we're certainly not going to send the signal to the markets and to the American people that default is an option. For that, let me turn to Senator Kyle.
Thank you, Leader. Let me reiterate that it has been our hope and continues to be our hope that an agreement can be reached to avoid both the default and the final kind of procedure that the Leader just announced. When we began the conversations with Vice President Biden, I was quite hopeful that we could reach an agreement. But as you know, Representative Cantor finally decided that we could not continue to participate at that level because the administration had, at the last meeting before then, made it clear that even minor savings in health care programs like Medicare, the kinds of things you can imagine correcting waste, fraud, and abuse, collecting money that needs to be collected, or not paying out benefits that people are not eligible for. Those kinds of reforms, not fundamental reform, but those kinds of reforms, even those kinds of things, which we had agreed upon, would require offsetting tax increases or increases in taxes of the same amount. And that's when we decided that it was not productive to continue at our level, and the Speaker of the House and the President then engaged. What the Leader and I have concluded after the meeting on Sunday, and particularly the meeting yesterday, is that the administration is now even walking away from agreements that we had tentatively made during the discussions with Vice President Biden. To be clear, there was an understanding that there would be no agreement on anything until everything was agreed to, but it is also the case that we had agreed on a significant amount of savings in the neighborhood of about $500 billion that, all else being equal, we could tell the American people could be saved. When the administration walked away from much of that yesterday afternoon, it became clear to us that we'd better be thinking about an alternative in the event that we couldn't reach an agreement. So that's the reason for our desire to at least be able to move forward in the event that our discussions down at the White House don't bear fruit.
Take a couple of questions. There are any, and then we're going to head down to the White House.
Can you just explain how that would work in sort of plain language, from what I understand?
Gosh, I don't know how to describe it other than how it would operate.
Okay.
We would authorize him to request of us that we raise the debt ceiling for the amount that he says he needs, because he says he will not make multiple, that he wants enough debt ceiling increase to take him through his end of his first term.
2.4 trillion.
He wants 2.4, he says. And he says he won't sign anything less than that. So taking him at his word, the way it would work is the legislation would authorize him to get to the amount he says he needs, based upon the advice of his Secretary of the Treasury, in 3 tranches. The first tranche, $700 billion. The second tranche, $900 billion. The third tranche, $900 billion. Once the request is made, it would be appropriate in either or both houses for a resolution of disapproval to be taken up on an expedited procedure. If that were to pass expedited procedure in both the House and the Senate, if the resolution of disapproval achieved a majority, it would go down to him where he could either sign it or veto it. My assumption is that he would veto it. And that veto would be sustained by 1/3 plus 1 in either of the houses. That's the way it would work.
So you could pass it essentially with 1/3 of legislators voting.
As a practical matter, yes.
Leader McConnell, Senator McConnell.
Can you tell us, number one, I just want to clarify, the spending cuts that Obama would detail, you said would be the same as the request?
No, we would not give him unilateral authority to cut spending on his own, but we would ask him, we would require him to specify cuts he would make if he could, commensurate with the amount that the tranche is asking for.
Okay, and then separately, how do you ensure that that revenue raisers aren't a part of an equation that he would handle?
Because it specifies spending cuts.
Leader McConnell, first of all, have you run this?
Have you run through this with Speaker Boehner? Is this legislation that could pass?
I've spoken with, about it with others.
Including the White House?
Jonathan?
Does this guarantee you're going to get your spending cuts or not? Because if he can do this on a third...
No, it doesn't. And as John Kyle has repeatedly reported to you, in these endless discussions, seemingly endless discussions that have gone on, we have become increasingly pessimistic that we will be able to reach an agreement with the only person in America who can sign something into law, and that's the President of the United States. This is not my first choice. My first choice is to get an agreement with the President to significantly reduce spending. And we're going to continue to talk to them about that in the hope that we can get there, because that's what we think is the single biggest problem.
What I don't understand, though, is why would you agree, why would Republicans in the House agree to essentially raising the debt ceiling without getting the spending cuts?
What we're not going to be a party to in the Senate, I'm pretty confident, is default. And the only way you can get an agreement that actually achieves something is when the President signs it. To actually reduce spending requires not just Republicans, but a Democratic Senate and a Democratic President. And we're still hoping to achieve spending reductions that he will sign. That's our first choice. I'm going to take one more and then we got to go.
If the figure for all of this is $2.4, $2.5 trillion, how is this a better alternative than just dealing with that figure all at once right now?
I think that it gives the President two more opportunities to focus on this problem and maybe reach an agreement with us. I'm not happy, and I hope we don't have to go to this option. I still want to cut spending. I was hoping he wanted to cut spending without extracting, as a condition for cutting spending, what we believe are job-killing tax increases. So that's the discussion that continues. John Cowell and I are going down to it one more time this afternoon, and whatever additional times the President requested, and we're hoping we'll get somewhere. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Down in front. Down, please.
On this vote, the yeas are 195, the nays are 230, and the amendment is not agreed to. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on amendment number 4, printed in the House Report 112-138 by the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Flake, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 4, printed in House